Good call. Or good catch, rather. All right, so welcome everybody to our inaugural session, an inaugural track for the mentoring sessions for C3. You can go ahead and hit the next slide, Dave. Dave will be driving the slides today. I'll be talking during the first few and then turn the time over to Dave as we get into the kind of meat and potatoes of what we'll be talking about today. First off, I just kind of want to introduce the people involved besides the business trainers and other leadership that are here to either just observe or to learn themselves. These are the groups that are here to support you throughout this entire process. And I know a lot of you have heard bits and pieces of Prism. There may be maybe some of you that haven't heard anything or had anything to do with Prism yet. And I just want to start off by saying, don't panic. This is the purpose of these mentoring sessions, is to make sure that everybody gets an introduction to Prism, starts understanding the fundamentals, knows their expectations as a business trainer, and all of those type of things. But as far as introductions go, the Prism training team, I'm the Prism training manager, and we have Patty Wilkinson, who's here. We also have David Brady, who's here. And then Colin Turner will be here periodically. That comprises the Prism training team. Oh, Colin is here. Hi, Colin. And then as far as the CNSI training team goes, they're an integral part of this whole thing as well. They're led up by Avril Lee. He's the CNSI training manager. Kyle Beard's the training lead. And then the trainers underneath them are Rick Tangaro, Michelle Smith, Dave Hill, John Gibbon, and Autumn for the next couple weeks at least. So they will be in and out as needed. And if we have questions for them, we can IM them and they'll pop in and answer any questions that we might have that's specific to CNSI.
And I'm just going to say, Autumn's last name really isn't Summer.
It's Autumn cool. Holly, right?
Yeah. I like that, though. Autumn Summer. Anyway, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I don't know where I saw that in the first place.
That's pretty good.
Anyway, and then we've also got the OCM team, the organizational change management team, that consists of Amanda and Bridget. I see Amanda. I saw Bridget join earlier. I think they're both on. So that kind of covers our introductions. If you would like to, there you go. Thank you. So these are the kind of high level topics of what we'll be talking about today. We've got kind of 2 hours to go through a lot of different information. First part being more introductory, and the subsequent parts being, like I mentioned, the more meat and potatoes. There will be, throughout these mentoring sessions, we'll be starting with this large individual mentoring session. This is the first track. We'll have another track, which is the same exact content, but for people that can't make it to this first one, that will happen on Monday. But the agenda that we'll be going through in both meetings, first off, we'll talk about basically a high level look at what expectations are for you as being a business trainer. We'll talk about the purpose and the schedule of the mentoring sessions. We'll talk about the Prism activity builder process. That's where Dave will take over, and he'll also explain what an end-to-end task analysis is and how to complete one. And then we'll go over next steps and answer any questions that you guys might have. So as far as the high level expectations go, so like I mentioned before, we don't expect anybody here to already be experts. So we have different levels all across the board of people that have had experience with Prism, whether it be in training material review, DSDD review, all sorts of different things. We've got people that are very knowledgeable about it, all the way down to people that have never even seen it or heard about it before. And so we're going to be catering kind of to that least common denominator and making sure that we explain the basics of everything so that by the time it's time for you to provide any sort of training to your colleagues and to your areas and your bureaus, you'll have a great understanding of what Prism is, what it does, how it'll help you do your day-to-day jobs. Um, so one of the expectations is, first off, you need to attend these sessions. So, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but this is the main first large mentoring session. But after that, we're going to be jumping right into individual mentoring sessions with specific groups and bureaus, um, where we'll be addressing things with you that are specific to your areas, because we know that each area uses Prism in a different way, will have different requirements, and eventually will have your own individual custom made training agendas for your people that will include facilitator guides and activity guides. Another high level expectation is that we'll ask you to complete an end-to-end task analysis for your business area and bureau. And Dave will go over that a little bit later in more detail about what that means. But it's a good time to bring up that these end-to-end task analyses and um, other items that we'll have for you are kind of considered homework. So, I mean, they are considered homework. We'll have these meetings, and then you'll have kind of an action item to take away from those. These are the things that I need to be working on. We also have a document where we'll be keeping track of those goals and milestones and when the due dates are, and we'll be reporting those things out to bureau and division leadership um, through a variety of different meetings, ESC, which is the Executive Steering Committee, the CCN, which is the Change Champion Network, implementation coordination meetings. So the status of where people are at it with this homework will be reported out, just so everybody has visibility, not to publicly shame everybody. Um, but so you will be getting the end-to-end task analysis as kind of one of your first homework assignments. And like I said, Dave will explain that more here in just a moment. Create customized training material that supports the end-to-end task analysis. Now, this training material might come in the form of things that already exist. CNSI has spent a lot of time, CNSI and the Prism training team and a lot of others have spent a lot of time developing e-learnings and user guides and that kind of stuff. And that's an example of training material that can support that end-to-end task analysis. And then we're going to have you identify what data that needs to be set up in the training environment for you to be able to go through those different activities with your people, kind of in an end-to-end way, start to finish through a process. And that'll be also what we expect from you eventually. Next slide, please, Dave. So other expectations, practice, 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 and you'll have plenty of time to practice and you'll have plenty of time to support or plenty of support with that practice. But it's important to be prepared to train you to go to your areas, your colleagues, your whole bureaus, if you're a trainer for the whole bureau, and be able to train that. And to do that effectively, you're going to need to practice. So we will be giving you opportunities to do that. If any of you were here for C1, when we were going through this process, we called it Train the Trainer, is where a lot of this kind of practice happened officially, where you would take your training materials that you prepared and present them to the other trainers as a way to kind of practice presenting so that you're ready to do it when it's time for your whole groups. To coordinate and schedule training sessions for Bureau staff before the go live date. We'll be doing that with you guys, but this is on an individual basis for the individual mentoring sessions, but this more specifically talks about making sure that you go in right before go live, sometime before go live, and making sure that you have enough time and have specific times and set schedules and agendas for your training sessions at go live. Excuse me. And then we expect you to communicate regularly with us, and as important, if not more important, communicate with your bureau directors, your bureau leadership, because I think a key pain point that we've noticed throughout preparing for this process is how busy everybody is. And we want you to know that we recognize that. And we need you to communicate with your bureau leadership, because they are hearing that Prism training and Prism testing is a priority. Without these things, Prism is not going to be launched on time for go live. And so these are things that have to be done. And if you're worried about the training activities or testing activities getting in the way of your day-to-day jobs, that's a conversation that definitely needs to be had with your leadership, because like I said, these are all competing priorities, but they're all very important priorities. And so it's been placed on the bureau leadership to make sure that you're given enough time to go through these testing and training activities.
Patrick, may I say something
Of
to
course,
that?
please.
Long time ago, year ago at least, Greg added Ann Granado to our, as a part of this leadership training in my area, but she still does not, and they communicated that. I was copied on the emails, but I'm still not seeing her added to any of these types of sessions. I mean, to the emails and stuff.
Okay.
I don't know where that's dropped, but my concern, why I'm bringing that up, is even if we do communicate, and even if they communicate to you, it's not being followed through.
Right. And not to make excuses at all, there's always going to be a little bit of human error involved, but we can definitely get Ann added to our list of trainers. We can get her added to the invitations for the things that we have already scheduled. We can get her to the second iteration of this training that'll happen on Monday,
Oh,
hopefully.
she's on it. I shared it. She's on it, and I've been sharing them, but I'm just bringing this up because I'm feeling like there's this shaming, you got to do all this, but there's not engagement on your part to help us in terms of adding like Ann on that. It brings a lot of anxiety to this.
Yeah, and that's totally understandable. And I apologize if we had a part in that miscommunication. But we'll definitely keep our eye open for other issues like that. And thank you for forwarding important information to her, knowing that she needs to be a part of this. And we'll make sure going forward that she's also involved on our end. But that's a good point. It's not just you guys that are expected to communicate. We need to make sure that we, as the Prism training team, CNSI and OCM, are also communicating as best we can with the group and with the leadership.
Yeah, it's a two-way street is my point. Or it's not going to get done if it's only a one-way street. So
right. Point well taken. Thank you.
Patrick, just so you know, I'm keeping track of any questions or concerns that people are bringing up to this meeting. So Debbie, I have added that concern, and I'll make sure that she is on all correspondence regarding your bureau. Okay.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dave. If you want to hit the next slide. So the purpose and the schedule of these mentoring sessions, we basically, in a nutshell, we're here, and this process is here to make sure that you're prepared to be successful trainers, taking a very, very complex system like Prism and identifying what needs to be trained to do your day-to-day activities and to prepare you as business trainers to be able to train your people on how to accomplish that. We'll be having these mentoring sessions throughout the year until, well, this is saying January 2023. Is that still correct, Gina? Because I thought our last ones were in October, but
No, that's just the go live date.
oh, right. Oh, that I'm reading it right now. The leading up to go live in January 2023. But yeah, the mentoring sessions will be going through October, the majority of which will be the individual mentoring sessions that I mentioned. But then, yeah, every now and again, we may have kind of a session like this where we'll kind of check in, have everybody come together. We can share wisdom and lessons learned and that kind of thing, and just make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page if we need to. But again, the majority of them will probably be individual sessions. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So do we have any other questions so far, or anything that anybody on the training team or CNSI or OCM would like to add before we jump into explaining the activity guides and the end-to-end task analysis?
I was going to follow up on Debbie's point. Is
All
there
right.
anyone else on the call that was an issue with? Like the same
That would
issue
be good to
that
know,
Ann had? Yeah, just throw that out there real fast.
I know recently we sent out another reminder to the Bureau leadership to fill out any missing people, because we have a list of business trainers, obviously, and we recently sent out a reminder that, hey, take another look at this document, make sure that it's up to date. And so hopefully we have, the
Everyone
majority
else
of
is
people.
accounted for. Yeah, okay.
Right.
Wanted to make sure.
But obviously that's not foolproof because we didn't catch Ann. So.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, then I will turn the time over to Dave.
Okay, thank you, Patrick.
You bet.
Appreciate that introduction. I was just thinking this morning how nice it would have been to actually be in the same room with everyone. You know, it's been a long time. Just remembering some of the times where we've had training in a computer classroom or other conference room, and being able to look into everyone's face. And so I've designated a new time frame, and that was 2019 PC, which was of course pre-COVID, where we could all be together in the same room. And that would have been nice to be able to continue to have some of these types of meetings with you in the same room. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about building Prism training materials. Feel free to ask me any questions, ask questions as we go. There'll probably be lots of questions either now or in the future. We just want you to know that we're available as a training team to answer your questions and to help you when you get stuck. I think we all get stuck when we're developing training, and we kind of need to know where can we turn to if we get stuck in the process. And that's what we're here for, is to assist you when that occurs. So our ultimate goal in building Prism training materials is to have useful, specific, and job relevant classroom materials and experiences for our training participants. And in our particular department, and for Prism, this is achieved by having customized activity guides and facilitator guides. Customized in this case meaning that it's very team specific scenarios and processes. During UAT training last summer, CNSI presented training material to us that really demonstrated system functionality, which of course is really important to understand how the system operates. But in addition to understanding how the system operates, we want to be able to actually integrate real life activities that demonstrate both system functionality and activities that represent real life activities that you would encounter on a day-to-day basis. What we don't want to have happen is when someone's in the classroom, they'll be like, I'm confused, or how does this relate to my job? We want to be able to develop activities in the classroom that are job relevant and make sense to the training participants. The other thing that's nice when you are creating these customized activity guides is that you can then leverage them for standard operating procedures. And SOPs are really important when it comes to being prepared for go live. You'll find that after go live, you'll have to even create more SOPs that you didn't realize needed to be created at the time of when you're going go live to go live training, or I'm sorry, go live in the system. So this is just kind of really high level overview of why it's important to build specific activities in the classroom. So what's an activity guide? Some of you might ask, what's an activity guide? An activity guide has all of the information a training participant needs to complete a very specific end-to-end Prism training activity. And why have we decided to use activity guides? The reason why we're using activity guides is it will really reduce the chances of a training participant becoming lost or frustrated during the classroom experience. You know, if you think about some of the times you were in training when we're all together in the same classroom, a lot of times we would have extra trainers or system experts available in the classroom, and they would kind of, you know, wander around in the classroom when someone got stuck, and they would help that person move along in the activity. Or, you know, sometimes then of course we'd stop the classroom experience and help that one person get caught up. So now where everything's being trained remotely, having a really good activity guide becomes even more important, because we can't, you know, jump in the car and run to someone's house and help them get unstuck. We have to have really good training material and be able to make sure everyone can follow along with the activity as we're proceeding. You know, and that's not to say that people still won't get stuck, you know, when they're training remotely. We will always have the opportunity using Google Meet to let them share their screen, and that's also a learning activity to see where they got stuck and how we would go about getting them through that particular situation to be able to catch up with the rest of the class. But that's really why an activity guide is really important, to be as specific and useful as possible. Yes, Lori, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, what does end-to-end mean exactly? Because I've seen that term, but I've never really known what we mean by that exactly.
You know, that's a great question. And I think maybe I have an actual screenshot of an activity guide on the next screen. So let's actually talk about that question when we get to that screenshot, because sometimes what I thought we've actually completed an end-to-end, maybe we haven't quite completed an end-to-end. There might be more that needs to be added to that particular activity to make it an end-to-end. So keep that question in mind, and let's talk about it more after I kind of present the next few screens. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. So here is a screenshot of an activity guide that I've worked on a couple months ago. And so I'm kind of going to do an anatomy of what an activity guide looks like, and then let's talk about that end-to-end question when we get to the next screen. But this kind of demonstrate what comprises an activity guide. We're leveraging what CNSI did during UAT training is we're using their activity guides, but for my activity guides, I've kind of modified them to what I feel like would work for me if I were training this particular activity in the classroom. And I just want to point out that all of you have that same, you know, luxury. We're not saying, you know, we're not trying to be super prescriptive, because for your bureaus, for your teams, you might find that you want to leverage something like this and modify it to what works a little bit better for your bureau team. So, but this is kind of an example of what you can use, and we've provided templates for activity guides. But in this situation, you have the name of the activity, and the activity in this instance is initiating and approving a new PA request by a DHS custody medical care worker. Yes, and you have a question.
Would you consider an activity guide to be the same thing as a standard operating procedure document?
They are a little bit different in that an activity guide will actually have specific data in it that you need for a specific trainee to complete that activity. So for example, you might supply inside the activity guide a beneficiary ID, provider ID, other types of information that you need that the provider, that the training participant will be using to complete a Prism training activity. But with that being said, these activity guides can then be leveraged, and then you could create SOPs from these activities because they are very specific, and then you could use those for your desktop procedures or SOPs based on the fact that you've been able to complete this training activity. Does that make sense, Anne?
Absolutely. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. That's a great question. And I sometimes had a hard time. I would use the term scenario interchangeably with the word activity. But what I've done to kind of differentiate the difference between an activity and a scenario is that the scenario really is you're setting up the stage for what's happening with this particular activity. And so in this particular activity, the scenario is the DHS custody medical care worker. They have to enter a PA for a foster care child who has not yet been determined eligible for Medicaid, or is eligible for foster care Medicaid, but they still need a non-covered service. And so in this scenario, the child needs medical services for a dental non-covered benefit of nitrous oxide. So the DHS custody medical care worker would enter all of the required prior authorization information into Prism. And in this particular instance, the DHS custody medical care worker, they're the same ones who actually approve the PA as part of their job. In most situations, when you receive a PA, of course, you have providers submitting a PA, and then on our end, on the state end, we would be working with and approving or denying those PAs. So that just kind of sets the stage of what the activity is and what the scenario is. And then from there, we're developing all of the steps it would take to complete this activity. So we'll have a training environment URL there in case they need that. And then when you're a training participant, you might have already, of course, had that training environment URL sent out to them. The way this activity guide has been divided out is kind of in tables. So the first real table is selecting your domain and selecting the appropriate profile. I know there's a lot of questions about profiles and which profiles you would use in activities. Don't stress or worry about that too much right now. Just know that we will help you with trying to help figure out what profile you might need to use in specific activities. Once someone selected the profile, then it would go to my inbox. From my inbox, then you would select what your next step was. And in this instance, they're going to the PA masthead and they're selecting the PA request list. So the way we've kind of broken down these activity guides is you would have a, look, I'm going to use a laser pointer. You would use, at the top of each table, you put either the name of the page or maybe the name of the step. in some instances, when you're on a Prism page, you might have lots of different steps you're going through, or it might just be a simple page where you're entering information and going to the next page. You can enter whatever makes sense here above the table, whether it's a step or a page or something else, depending on what you're working on inside the system. So on the left-hand side of the table, you'll have the name of the fields, labels, drop downs, and buttons, so that you're drawing the training participants' attention to what they should be looking for when you're talking about the system and when you're displaying the system. And as they're following along you and they're actually completing the activity on their own, they can quickly see what fields, labels, or drop downs or buttons they're looking for. And then on the right side of the table, the information that would need to be entered that corresponds to that field, label, drop down, or button. This next page here, I just created another screenshot, and when you have certain data that needs to be supplied to the training participant, you can actually go ahead and enter that information here for the participant to use, or like what CNSI did, they had a separate table that had a list of a bunch of data that can be used rather than supplying it here. Whatever works best for you in your situation. But for me, I think that supplying as much information in the activity guide, even if it means multiple beneficiary IDs, that's really helpful to help the training participant from getting lost. Steve, you have a question.
Yeah, one of the things that we ran into at the previous one was, yes, the information was right there, but all of us that were doing the training at the time were using that same one, and we were basically creating a roadblock for ourselves. Only one person could do it at a time. Is there anything that we can do other than creating an individual roadmap for each person?
So let me make sure I understand your question, Steve. So if everyone was using, let's say in this example, the very same beneficiary ID, you might in that particular activity, because you're creating a PA and it's the very same PA for that beneficiary, then that would create a roadblock for everyone, right?
That's correct. Only one person could use it, basically.
Yeah, and so that's why here in this particular document, you would be sending these out beforehand, the day before to the training participants, and the information that they would have, say, in their beneficiary ID would be unique for them. It wouldn't be the same ID that the other training participants would use. That would be the challenge, is making sure that everyone has their own unique data. But I guess further, you're wondering if there's a way to even maybe get around that. Is that what part of your question too?
Well, I'm just wondering if anything has been developed so we've got these documents. So you want us to create one document for each person that we're training. In my group, that's not an issue because there are only 5 of us. But for some areas, they've got 20, 30 people that they're going to be training. And to be able to have that many different scenarios going on, is that possible?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I've thought about that, and it may depend upon that team or bureau and on that particular activity if it requires unique data or not, because in some areas in Prism, when you're going through an activity, it may not require unique data. So it might be a case-by-case basis, and maybe the answer also to that is when we meet with you for the individual mentoring, is that we can kind of brainstorm and actually see what we can do to help alleviate maybe that particular problem. Because 20 people trying to figure out unique data might be a challenge. The other thing, and I was going to bring this up later, but the other thing that we can do is leverage CNSI to say, hey, we need this amount of data, and this is the type of data we need to create these activities, and kind of put that on them to give us all of that unique data we need. And then all we'll need to do is just supply that information here in these fields. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just trying to avoid some of these roadblocks that we had before.
Yeah. That, I mean, when we hit those roadblocks, it's really uncomfortable for everyone in the training, and we want to avoid that. And so that's part of the whole, as you're developing those and practicing those and seeing what kind of roadblocks occur, then, you know, reaching out for help and seeing what we can do to maybe minimize that. And there's probably lots of different ways to overcome that. And in some situations, it might be the trainer just demonstrating in some instances. So you don't have to worry about everybody doing the same thing. So there'll just have to be some brainstorming on the best way to do that to make sure we don't have that happen like you're talking about, Steve. That's a great point. We don't want to do that. Any other, well, so let's make sure that we'll track that question. I think Patty's tracking a lot of those questions. We'll keep track of that one. And where we identify that that's going to be a potential problem for a specific activity, let's figure out ways to get around that, because that's a great point. Going back to the end-to-end question that Laurie had. So this is actually an activity I was working with Julie Fisher-Rivera, and she works with DHS CMC profile for the custody medical care. And so after we kind of went through this activity, she said, oh, and then, so this is not quite an end-to-end, because she said, oh, and then we have to create correspondence to send to the provider. Oh, and then, and I think the process is currently some sort of special payment for this. She didn't know what the next step is after correspondence, and I haven't actually gone down that road yet either. For, okay, then how do we make sure that this particular PA that's been approved, now how does that get paid? So so maybe by the time we get to that point where, you know, that is paid, that might constitute an end-to-end process. When we're looking at some of these processes in Prism, we can start off with something pretty similar, like a PA request being submitted by a provider, which could be we're going in and we're actually logging in as a provider. We're submitting the PA. You know, the person who's responsible for reviewing that PA then reviews it and approves it. And then, you know, the other part of that is, okay, now the claim is being submitted for that PA and joining that PA with the claim. It could be a very, very big end-to-end process. You know, this is a complete end-to-end in the, you know, in real terms. So some of that might be depending on what your team or bureau considers an end-to-end, and it could be that you're taking this piece of an end-to-end, going through it as a training, and then you're adding the next piece of that puzzle for the next part of that end-to-end. Does that kind of answer your question, Laura?
It does. Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions about that? And I don't know that we've fully satisfied Steve's question. Do you have any other thoughts about that, Steve? And what do you think next steps could be as far as your question is concerned?
Well, as you pointed out, it's going to depend on the different trainers' situation. So I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, but I think we need all of those that come up with that you need help with, that need to be brought to our attention. We want to help you work through those and see what a good you know, a good answer for the classroom would be. Vicki.
I just wanted to comment on Steve. Some of the trainings I've been in earlier, they just referred us to a spreadsheet, but they had our name on the spreadsheet and our particular data we could use. So it wasn't just a list of like a whole bunch of beneficiaries. It was my name, and you can use these beneficiaries out of the list. So you didn't have to have individual sheets. It just referred us to that other sheet, and I just had to find my name on that sheet to get my providers I could use, my beneficiaries I could use. So I don't know if that helps.
That would, yep.
Yeah, and that's how CNSI handled a lot of their data. In some instances, the data I think worked. In other instances, it didn't. So that's the other tricky part of it, is making sure that the data fits your scenario as far as I need this type of beneficiary or I need this type of provider. So there's all of those types of things to work out for sure. All right, let's move on. So this is the Prism. Look, it's a pyramid. It's a Prism activity builder process, which we just got done talking about. You know, one portion of it is the activity guides, but the first step really is to assess your teamwork tasks, assess the existing UAT activity and facilitator guides, create and test activity and facilitator guides, and ultimately is practice. So this is kind of just at a high level snapshot. The process that we're going to be working through is assessing, and assessing is more than just the teamwork tasks, but there's some other assessment activities that can be done, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But the first step is really assessing teamwork tasks. And there's kind of 4 unique assessment activities as far as assessing teamwork tasks, and these are, you know, performing an end-to-end task assessment, and we're going to be talking about that more in just a little bit. Assessing your current business procedures, evaluating OCM change alerts and action items, and evaluate existing UAT test cases. For our purposes, during this meeting, we're going to focus on the end-to-end task assessment. And as time permits, we can talk more about evaluating UAT test cases for inclusion in activities. But we're going to focus for now on this end-to-end task assessment. And so what we've done is we created a few documents that can help you track, document, and prioritize your teamwork tasks. And these documents are available in Word, fillable PDF, and Excel versions. So the first thing I want to talk about is this. I've taken a screenshot of what's called the end-to-end task analysis list. And I think it's a good time right now to kind of just talk about the differences between all of the different trainers and who are they're training. Because as Steve pointed out, you know, you might have a team of 20 that you have to train. In some instances, not only do you have your team members to train, but maybe you have a sister agency that you're worrying about training. In other instances, it might be just you and maybe your backup that you have to train in these processes. The reason why I point that out now is on this task analysis list, you could use this document just to kind of document your tasks if you're the only one that really that has a certain job in the system. And so you could document what your tasks are and then kind of prioritize those as far as what you think would be the most important to start looking at as far as creating an activity in the system. But if you have quite a few different people that you are training, and you might not even know all of their particular jobs as it pertains to this system, but you are in charge of training them, then you might need to gather more information from that person as far as what they use the current system for in their tasks during the day. And so here on this list, we have a frequency table right there that says, okay, in order to kind of analyze how often someone performs a certain task, write down the task, include as much detail as possible, and then kind of refer to that frequency legend as far as how often do you do that task during your time. Is it hourly to many times each hour? Is it every few hours to daily? Is it every few days to weekly, or is it every few weeks to monthly? So we actually had a guinea pig. That's not a very nice term, is it? Guinea pig. What's a better way to say that? We had someone test our documents.
A volunteer.
A volunteer, not a guinea pig, for heaven's sakes. Try out this because they actually had multiple teams that are in charge of training, and not only multiple teams, but other agencies like DHS and DWS they have to work with to find out what their tasks are in the system. So I'm going to bring up an example. Here, maybe. Sorry, I need to get some things out of the way of my screen. There it is. So Summer Bradbury volunteered to help us test out this task analysis list. So she sent out with in an email this document, this fillable PDF, and she helped us actually simplify this document, make it a little bit easier to fill out, and she sent it out to teams and other people she works with outside of her team to find out what some of their answers are as far as how they use the current system to do some of their tasks. This is just an example of one person with their responses, and I believe she works for DWS. One of the things she said that she does hourly to many times each hour was that in the second line was she would like to be able to see a pregnancy indicator so that she doesn't have to ask DOH workers if this is now showing, as it doesn't show for them in MCS, and she needs that daily. And then she identified a few other tasks in the system that were more every few days to weekly. Anyway, she sent that out to all these different people, and then she had all the responses come back, and we have a spreadsheet that we have an Excel spreadsheet. Summer actually converted hers to a Google sheet, and what she did is she documented everyone's response by their team or by their department into these different tabs down below. And so she was actually she's able to see all of the different tasks that they have determined that they do frequently. And then she could use this particular analysis to determine what some of the activities she would want to build from this list. So, Summer, are you there? Hi, Jess.
Yes, I am here.
How do you feel about your name being brought up?
Embarrassed.
But thank you for doing that, Summer. Can you kind of talk about your experience and what you found out by going through this exercise?
So the thing that I appreciated the most was because I'm training some people who are doing jobs that I don't do, it made it so that I actually found out that they do certain things that I had forgotten that they do. So it'll be easier for me to make sure to include that in my training. Had I not had this, it would have been something that I just completely missed when creating my facilitator guide and activity guide for them. And like for the frequency, it's also going to be helpful for me when I'm creating the activity guides and stuff like that to know where more time is likely to be spent because it's to them a higher priority or something that they do the most frequently. So
yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody have I know we're throwing a lot out there today, but would anybody have questions just specifically about this activity? And again, I just want to point out that we're not being so prescriptive that this has to be done. If you're the only person that's doing this job, is a tool to help you figure out what activities you might need to develop that maybe you weren't aware of. So what kind of questions does this bring up? Okay, feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or comments.
Is Lori out there? Just because she had a question earlier on the end-to-end, I'm wondering how you feel about this now. Lori, are you still on the call?
Yeah, I don't have any questions. It seems pretty clear cut.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, Lori, go ahead.
At what point do we send this like questionnaire or whatever this is out to our team members to ask them these questions? Like, how are you doing this process? Like, what point do we do this?
That is a great question. I actually am going to be covering that towards the end of our time. We have a handy dandy tracking tool that has some time frames in it that you'll be able to see as far as kind of what our general recommendations are as far as when to send this out and when to gather it. And so we'll actually cover that, Lori, towards the end. And you can see some of the tools that we're using where you can actually grab these documents as well that you'll have available for you to download and send to the people that you want to send them to. So we'll cover that towards the end if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, but great question, because yeah, that's important. Okay. Yeah, feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions. I appreciate the questions so far. They're super good. All right, let's see here. Everybody see the PowerPoint again?
Yes.
Okay. I've got actually 3 monitors, and I'm actually kind of, freaking out a little bit about trying to keep track of everything. So let me know if something goes wonky. Okay. So we kind of talked about, the spreadsheet to then document and list the priorities of everyone. You can leverage that however you want. Like I said, you might have a lot of teams that you're working with. You may have just a few small number of people, but I think it'll be important to include in a list like this your priority based on frequency, like Summer was saying. Okay, so we've talked about assessing teamwork tasks, and like I said, there's other parts of the assessment like evaluating UAT test cases, and we can talk more about that maybe during individual sessions, or if we have time later in this session today, we can talk about evaluating UAT test cases and using those to create activity guides from, because that's a really good option as well. But this next step is assessing your activity and facilitator guides, and those are the UAT activity and facilitator guides that were developed by CNSI, and they were used this last summer. And let's talk a little bit about assessing those. And let's just have some screenshots of facilitator guide, of activity guide. PowerPoint, there are PowerPoints that are also that you can actually use to help demonstrate some of the your training activities, but mostly the PowerPoints were used just to introduce the topic. I know that Summer mentioned that one of her teams in DWS, the way they like to be trained is by PowerPoint. So you might actually have to, depending on how the people you're training, how they like to be trained, and use SOPs, standard operating procedures, because it sounds like that's the way DWS does a lot of their training, is by PowerPoint. And so now that puts more on, her plate, and it might put more on your plate to develop material the way that your end users kind of want them. And then, like Vicki mentioned, since I use these data sheets with the names of the specific trainee to use as their data, and that is definitely something that you can do to leverage using data. But where are your facilitator and activity guides? So when you go into SharePoint, in the Prism SharePoint site, and you'll probably land on MMRP, but if you just click on the training hyperlink, this beautiful colorful little menu will display, and what you'll want to focus on is this business trainer documents and resources. And that's where currently your existing UAT activity guides and facilitator guides are located. So when you click on that link, it'll bring up this particular folder structure, which has business bureau trainer SOPs, bureau trainer templates, C3 mentoring sessions, and C3 training resources. Right now, those activity guides and facilitator guides are in there, and they're broken down right now by subsystem. And then you can click on one of those your subsystem that you're interested in grabbing those activity guides and facilitator guides, and then you'll see those documents sitting there in those folders. And they can be, they're designated by FG at the end of the naming convention for facilitator guide, of course, PowerPoint, and activity guide, sample data. So you can go through and review that material, see what material from that can be leveraged and included in any of your activities, modified for your facilitator guides. I'm just going to bring up an example of the facilitator guide. Here, I just brought up claims and encounter facilitator guide. Like we mentioned, a lot of the activities during UAT were more just system and not super specific. But that's not to say that the facilitator guides don't have a lot of great information in them as far as learning about different pages in the system or different fields in the system. You can gather information from those facilitator guides and include those in your own as you're explaining such things as line item information, for example. And anyway, this particular facilitator guide has 82 pages of information, so it'll be important to go through that existing material and see what can be leveraged and used in whatever activity you're developing. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, so read through the facilitator and activity guides and assess the following. Can any of the existing activities be modified and leveraged to match team tasks? What business process changes are needed for our team? Have they already been identified? Are there manual processes that are now automated? What processes are automated but now manual? And what questions has my assessment produced? Okay, and then the next thing is really creating and testing activity and facilitator guides. Once you've gone through your assessment process, it is time to create and test your activities in the training environment, update your activity guides. These two things can be done simultaneously. And what I really wanted to talk about is this, as I've gone through and I've tried to create some activity guides based on whatever system I'm testing and understand, is I will have a blank activity guide or maybe an existing activity guide that has the similar types of information. And as I'm beginning to try and test this new end-to-end activity, I will use the activity guide to document my questions. And I think I might have a screenshot of that. And so I'd really use track changes and comment functionality in my activity guide. And if I get stuck or if I have questions, I will insert a comment and put in what I'm stuck with, what is the roadblock, or do I need to check existing design documentation because I'm not understanding. Just use the activity guide as you're testing your scenario, testing that activity in the system to document any things that you have questions about or problems with. Sometimes you need to step away from it for a while when you get stuck, and try to then ask someone else, reach out for help, and then be able to resume maybe trying to complete that particular activity. For me, it's actually quite rewarding to be able to get through a process and to document something and to feel like you can get through an end-to-end scenario and make it work. Maybe that doesn't sound too thrilling, but it actually is quite rewarding to know that. And this is actually, you're training yourself as well. You're feeling more confident with the system. You're feeling like things are starting to click for you, and you're feeling like, okay, I'm beginning to understand this process a little bit more. What kind of questions does that bring up?
I guess, is everybody okay? Is this like too much information?
Yeah.
Are you asleep, or does it feel overwhelming? I don't know. Heather, I see your face, so I'm going to call on you. How are you doing with all of this?
I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if Heather's feeling overwhelmed, I'm sure there's a few other people that are feeling overwhelmed as well. But that's why we have the individual, I sent out appointments. So you should have gotten appointments for the individual mentoring sessions. So that gives you a couple weeks to catch your breath, to start the task analysis, and we can regroup individually so we can see what your individual bureau concerns are. So know that we're not going to give it too much time where you're drinking from a fire hose, and then we're going to check on you and meet with you.
Okay.
I just
Okay.
want to say this is the most sense any Prism meeting has ever made to me. So thank you, everyone. Like I've only been in this for maybe like a couple of months, but thank you. This makes a lot of sense, actually.
Wonderful.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Lori. Like, this is the first meeting I went to that I'm like, oh, okay, not too bad.
Well, that's good to hear. And we also know that it's overwhelming. Yeah. But so let me just tell you a few of my thoughts that I was debating whether to bring up or not. So when we did provider enrollment, release 3 is what it really was back before we moved to the cloud. You know, we went through this process, and the provider enrollment team really had more of our undivided attention, you know, because it was just provider enrollment and a few other things. And we were able to help them a lot more and be able to help develop a lot of these activities for them, but they had their input and things like that. And we wish we could do that very same thing for C3, you know, but we don't have the bandwidth to create all of them for you, but we do have the bandwidth to help. And when it comes to someone who might get stuck, you know, you please reach out, because I enjoy learning new things about the system, new subsystems. I'm totally happy to try and, you know, get involved in and to help. And that's what we're for. But we also have other resources. We have business analysts, we have CNSI people, we have lots of resources to help you make sure that you get the material you need to train your coworkers. And that's what we're for. And even if I'm not the business process expert for your particular area, I can learn the system and help you integrate a lot of those business processes into these activities. And like Patty mentioned, yeah, that's what the individual mentoring sessions are for. So thank you for that feedback. All of it is really helpful. Okay. Here we go. So To help you, we have activity and facilitator guide templates, activity and facilitator guide examples, which are really the UAT activity and facilitator guide examples. As we've mentioned, individual mentoring sessions. We have a questions tracker, which I will demonstrate or refer to in a little bit. And then we as Prism trainers are assigned to subsystems. So I just want to throw out some of the topics. So the individual mentoring sessions can be very organic. It can be whatever you need. It doesn't necessarily have to follow along with what our agenda is. It's what you need. So for example, we know that when Patrick sent out some of the questions about what types of training you need, some of the comments were they'd like to know how to understand and read and use design documents. So part of an individual mentoring session is because we could spend time teaching you how to read design documents, so that you can refer to those as you're going through your activities and looking for your own answers. And we can talk about, the progress in creating the Prism training activities using the activity guide. We can also, during those individual mentoring sessions, if you are feeling uncomfortable with even some of just the Prism basics, such as navigations, using notifications, or even how to use list pages, we can do that during individual mentoring session. How to find data and how to submit a data setup request, and also how to use test cases to create activities. Those are just some examples of what topics you can ask for, or that we can be prepared for in an individual mentoring session. Let's see, where are we? Oh yeah, okay. So the question earlier was, okay, what's my time frames? And what do I have to do to make sure I hit those time frames? So I actually we've created a document, and I'm going to pull that up here in a second, but this is just a screenshot. And talk about feeling overwhelmed. We don't want you to feel overwhelmed. We're using this document to help. And it'll have lots of different line items on it. But if you take it one line item at a time and just work on that particular line item, and there'll be some, simultaneous activities you can work on as well, I don't think that this necessarily has to be overwhelming. Like we said, we're here to help you. But we have this, this task list in a Google spreadsheet. And let me just pull that up so you can see it for live. Let me zoom in a little bit. So at the bottom of this spreadsheet, we have actually broken it out into bureaus and teams within those bureaus. Now, it's highly likely or highly possible that we missed a team. And if we did, you can let us know and we can make sure we create that tab for you. And there's a lot of tabs. Wanted to make sure we have an individual task list for each bureau, and team within that bureau. But let me just kind of collapse that. Debbie, yes, go ahead.
So unless I misunderstood, you guys said that you'd send out individual training sessions to the individual ones, customized, and I didn't get any appointments. Does that mean we've been overlooked or just down the road and it will to be expected?
Debbie, you're in BMHC, is that correct?
Yes.
You should have got an appointment for March 3rd. And let me take a look.
Maybe I did and just didn't know what it was. I'll look. I mean, we get so many meetings.
Anne is on there. Anne is on there too, just so you know. Anne is on that appointment. And I'll double check and make sure that you're on there as well. Yep, you're on there and you accepted the appointment. So
Okay.
It's for March 3rd.
All right. Yeah. We get so many of these that don't even pertain to us. It's really kind of hard to figure out what's going on, honestly.
Yeah. So folks, because Debbie asked that and then another person reached out, you should have gotten individual session appointments And they are on, so BMHC is on March 3rd. Financial management is on March 2nd. And BEP is on the 28th. So you either got an appointment for the week of the 21st or the 28th or the first week of March. So just take a look at your calendar if you would.
Okay, great question. Thank you, Debbie. On this task list, like I mentioned, it's broken down by bureau and then broken down further into teams. If we missed you, we're going to share this spreadsheet with everyone in the meeting. We haven't done that yet, but we will. We'll either do that today or Monday, depending, but we'll probably actually want to do that today, because actually some of your very first tasks are supposed to start Monday. And so we have assess team tasks, and assess activity and facilitator guides, create activity guides, and create facilitator guides. And we have those broken down into time frames. So assessing team tasks, this was our initial just, try to figure out what a nice time frame would be. And we've got January 31st through March 4th as an opportunity to assess team tasks. So what that looks like for assessing team tasks is distribute the end-to-end analysis document to your team members. And we have a start date of January 31st, and we put a due date of February 4th. So really that's a week time of making sure you can distribute that to your team members. We've kind of color coded that over to the right so you can kind of see those time frames. Once you've actually completed a task, you can go ahead and mark that with a percentage. And so in this instance, it's 100% done. The other thing I've done for each of your teams is I've included a link to your specific analysis documents. And so when you click on that, it'll open up SharePoint. Let me show you what that looks like real quick. And and in Google Sheets, it's not really clicking on the blue hyperlink itself. It'll display the URL just right directly below it. Okay, so when you click on that, it'll bring up SharePoint. Let me scroll in a little bit. We have your analysis documents here. This one right here with the PDF, that's the fillable PDF that Summer preferred to use when she sent that out to her team members and external agency. You can use the Word document version if you want. And then this is the spreadsheet where you can collect all your data and then do further analysis on it. Additionally, while I'm here, I've included a blank activity guide template. The other thing that you will see from time to time, if I happen to create an activity guide in your area, I'll drop it in here. So like the prior authorization for the DHS CMC, I need to drop that activity in its appropriate folder. But here's where your blank template will be. And if you wanted to, we have that other area in Prism where the UAT activity guides are. If you wanted to, you could drop those in here as well. In the facilitator guides folder, I have some facilitator guide templates that you can leverage and use as you're working on your facilitator guide. Let me just mention something real quick about facilitator guides. CNSI, when they created their facilitator guides, in their table format, they had really, really small screenshots of the system. These particular templates can be used where you have bigger screenshots that will be easier for you to refer to and mark up and highlight certain areas of the screenshot as you want. So we've included those as blank templates. Let's see, there's a question. Let's see, let me open that up. The question disappeared. Are you going to send us links to all these things? You are going too fast for me to be able to remember where we're going. Yes. Yes, thanks, Richard. So this document, where'd it go? It's here somewhere. I'm sorry. I just lost my spreadsheet.
It's giving Robert a chance to catch up with you since you're moving so fast.
Yes, yes. What did I do? Okay, I am going to have to, I must have accidentally closed that. I'm sorry. Hang on just a second. Let me open that up real quick. I hope. How did I do that?
So while
Yeah.
you're looking, can I just ask, so we can use these files and dump anything in these that we want out on SharePoint? Or
Yep.
should we be keeping our documents offline and only putting our finals in here?
It's really up to you, Vicki, how
Okay.
you want to leverage it. I think for us, if I'm able to complete an activity guide in your area, or Patty's able to complete an activity guide in your area, anybody does it, we'll put it in there in the SharePoint. And then you just might want to, we can let you know if we happen to do that.
But it would be nice if you'd let us know you're working on one, because if we're working on the same activity guide, it's a waste of time for both of us. So a heads up before you put it out there that you've created one, say, hey, we're working on creating this for you.
That's true.
Thanks, guys.
That's true. Yeah, thanks, Vicki. Okay, sorry, Richard. That's a great reminder to me, because sometimes I do go too fast. So I would always appreciate someone telling me that, because then it's like, oh, I gotta make sure we can get up through all this material. But yes, it is drinking from the fire hose a little bit too much. This particular Prism business training mentoring session task list, that's a mouthful. We are going to share that with you, and so you'll get that in your email that's shared, and then you can go into it, and we will have, like, for example, when I clicked on that link to go into SharePoint, you will have that link to that portion in SharePoint. But just as a matter of just demonstrating that for you, let me show you where they're located, just taking it from the top. So if we go into SharePoint, if I can type my password in front of everyone without doing it incorrectly, that'd be amazing. See, I didn't do that. The pressure's on. Goodness. This was a test and I failed. Okay, so if we wanted to find those same facilitator guide templates and assessment tools, if you go into the training area of SharePoint, we've got this business trainer documents and resources. And right now there's kind of two main places for you right now to look in, and the information we're talking about today is really in this C3 mentoring sessions. And we have it broken down by bureau, and then further is broken down by team. And again, if we're missing your team, let me know and we will add that. And then you'll have within that folder your task analysis list and your activity guide and facilitator guide templates. But just as a reminder, from this mentoring session task list, when you click on this link, it will go to your particular team. I have those individualized for each of these folders. When you click on that, it'll go to your specific team folder. Does that answer your question, Richard? Okay, good. The other thing, before I forget to mention it, is there's a link up here called Questions Tracker that is on each one of the tabs as well. So if you have a question you're struggling with, Patrick created this question and issue tracker by bureau. So you could go into your bureau and team and then document what your question or issue is. So Patrick, I guess the question is, what would be the process for them notifying us that they've logged in a question in this question tracker?
Well, I think
is that in the first tab?
Well, there are the instructions there, yeah, but I don't think that we necessarily addressed that. So what I think it's incumbent on us to periodically review that document and indicate what has been addressed and what hasn't, and kind of go from there. I don't think we should necessarily add any more tasks to the business trainers to let us know the document's changed. I think it's incumbent on us to look for it.
Okay, and then maybe if you get a chance to email us that you've documented a question, send it to the training team. That would be helpful, especially if it's urgent. Just send us an email to let us know. Patty, what's that look of confusement I see on your face?
I'm just thinking I'll be checking that every day. I will be doing my due diligence as well. But yeah, an email would be great if it's important, and I am, and I'll be checking it every day.
Mary, we haven't heard from you yet, Mary. I'm surprised. You usually have lots of questions.
Well, yeah. So I do have a question now.
Yeah.
On the team names, I'm kind of poking around through the BMHC, and I'm just curious how you got team names or decided on them.
Well, so that was not a scientific process, Mary, that I did. What I did is there was a document also that was sent out for where you were asking the bureaus what kind of help they needed and what kind of training they needed. And there were actually, those were kind of in each tab, they had different teams' names listed under that. And I didn't know if that was your bureau had put those little sections in that little document, and I just grabbed them from there. And so really, please let me know what is wrong or needs to be updated. And even if you wanted yourself to go into your tab, if you double clicked on the bottom of it and you wanted to make the name better, feel free to do that. Also, if you feel like a team was missing, you could just go ahead and you could duplicate that a sheet and put in the new team name in there if you wanted to.
Okay. So I guess, yeah, I remember that that spreadsheet you were talking about as far as things that we needed to know. So many of the things that we do crosses subsystems. So I see that subsystems were listed. There are some specific teams, but when it comes to how would you suggest organizing it best? By team and their specific activities, or by process, or by subsystem, or that's something that I struggle with, because even some of the things we do probably would span into other bureaus or rely on other bureaus' activities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, and I've struggled with that myself too. I saw one document recently, and I was going to try to actually leverage that because it had a list of all the bureaus, and then also it had a list of all the subsystems that then kind of translated from bureau to bureau. And how we could leverage, because it really kind of goes back to Vicky's point, is like, if you're working on something, it'd be nice to know. If you're working on this particular, PA or claim, but I was also going to work on that. I don't know that I have an answer for that right now. Does anybody have any suggestions?
Well, if I understand the question, I think just as a general direction that we're going is we're definitely not trying to arrange these things by subsystem. So we can kind of cross that off of the list of options. We're looking at more as based on your individual teams and their day-to-day tasks that they do in those teams. But like you said, part of those tasks may be being done by a different team, and you're just one section of an end-to-end thing. but your team's end to end is from when it gets handed off to you to when you hand it off to somebody else. So you could still train it to that specificity, if that makes any sense.
So, I mean, I think a good example to me is PAs, right? You have the prior authorization team that does PAs, but custody medical is in BMO. It's not in PA. So custody medical does PAs, but it's the same process as somebody else who does a PA. So does custody medical create how to do a PA and PA create how to do a PA, or does PA create the process and custody medical takes it and just tweaks it for what theirs is? So I think that's the coordination we need to kind of figure. So managed care, we don't do anything on enrolling and stuff, but we still need to know about managed care and what's going on with it. So I think managed care can develop it, but then we would need to probably take theirs and say, oh, but we need these parts of what they've created to make sure our staff understand those parts, rather than starting from new and me trying to create when they're really the ones that have the specialty. I think that's how do you coordinate that, I guess.
No, that's a great question. It might be something that the team needs to get together and talk about, and we can respond in the individual sessions. But my thoughts too are that some of these tasks, these processes, these kind of scenarios, like David has mentioned, they already exist as UAT training facilitator and activity guides that you could go through that list of those things and pull the ones that you think apply and then tweak them to your specific.
Right, but still that's at a high level. That's not at the process level. So they're adding the processes, which I would want to know those processes. But anyway.
Yeah, Vicki, I mean, I think that your example of the CMC is a good one. Now, Julie, who's doing the CMC stuff with that particular PA, she's and I had worked together and had to develop that. And I think my personal opinion is if we're looking at very specific scenarios, kind of like the scenario that we demonstrated in that activity guide, this is the scenario. To me, that if that particular trainer is kind of responsible on working with that PA, I personally feel like they should probably work on that activity guide, because it's their process. They own it, I believe. And so if you own it, I think that might be a good way of differentiating. But then, yeah, just coordinating with someone else who you think would benefit from that, and making sure that there's no toes being stepped on, or actually duplication, so that we can maximize everybody's work.
So maybe it's just a coordination between ourselves. Maybe having a list who are the trainers in each of the groups would be helpful to all of us, right? So if we're working on it and we know we want to do this one part, then what you're saying is I would coordinate with Mary and say, hey, I see we need to train this. Are you getting into that, or should we develop it? And we'll just have to coordinate between each other. But it would be good to have a list of who are all the trainers for each of the different areas.
And we do have that list, and we can make that available to everybody. In fact, it's already up in SharePoint. I can't remember if it's in the business trainer resources or if it's in the Prism training team resources folder.
It's in the trainer.
Do you want me to pull it up and direct me how to go from the top?
Right, that'd be great, Dave. Right there, then go to business trainer right there. Yep. And then just scroll, see it's at the bottom, that Word doc. That's it.
It's opening. Yeah, I know that there have been a few adjustments made and some deletions and some additions lately.
Right, this is what Patrick was mentioning earlier, how we send it out to bureau directors to make updates, because it had been a while since they had reviewed it.
So we could try to coordinate by looking at who's the trainer, but still, like, it could be that we're not entirely sure what the new process might be, and who, where it now goes in Prism. So, or even if there's ideas of like, we need to know about this, what's happening with this part of a process. If we put it on that question link on that tab, just having perhaps you all help coordinate that and maybe connect dots, and we can say, we think, BMO does this today. We're not sure what it's going to look like in the future, and maybe help us help each other.
Yeah,
with that.
absolutely.
That's great.
Collect those things, and also too, or if there's items that we think of that, whether we want to know about it or that we rely on somebody today to do it, kind of that back, whether we need it or we want to get it, put it on that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. I think we could support doing that.
Yeah, Mary, I like that. And I want to and pull into Amanda and Bridget in that fold as well, just because there's an OCM component of who does what in the system. That's OCM, right? The system is the system, but who does what piece is an OCM component. And so we would pull in Amanda and Bridget in that coordination. On that document, does it show like who's writing the question so we can research as well? If our team is doing that, who we can research to make sure that we have all the facts. And the more information you give, the better on those questions. That would assist us on researching that and coordinating those items for you. I'm pretty sure it lists has a column for who the submitter is and the date they submitted it, so we can track responsiveness and who to loop back around with, of course, of who submitted it. So yeah, I think that's all there, Patty. Good.
Let's see. Richard had a question. Who will be my mentor? I can reach out to them? Question mark. Richard, what area do you work in?
It's BFS.
BFS, so financial
services. It's under DMHF.
Is that me or Patty? Patrick, I don't remember.
I have to bring up my.
We are
Richard,
together in this, Dave.
So Richard, you can reach out to either Patty or myself.
Okay.
And then we'll coordinate between the two of us, and remember who's assigned what. But you can email both of us, and we'll respond to you and make sure that we take care of you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Actually, it looks like Kyle is over finance.
Well, yeah, between me and Patty, though.
I'm not Kyle. I mean, sorry, Colin.
Oh, Colin.
Yeah,
no, I'd still refer to Patty or myself. Just email both of us, Richard.
Okay.
And that really goes for anyone. Really, feel free to email both Patty and myself, who were working with the subsystems to answer your questions. Okay, let's see. Where are we? Here we are. Yes, so we were talking about this task list. Oh, let me go back to it. I hope I didn't close it again. So as I was mentioning, this will help you actually keep track of your tasks, and you can mark them as complete with the percentage. And look at that, it's 100%, and it'll turn all the way green. If you have another task that you're halfway through, you can go ahead and mark that as 50%, and it's halfway green, etc. This is, transparency, so that we can see where you're at and see what help might be needed depending on the areas that you're working on, and we can reach out if it looks like someone needs some help. But this whole assess team task section, we would hope to be completed by March 4th. And some of those simultaneous activities are just evaluating your UAT test cases, OCM change alerts, and then being able to really identify the tasks that are going to become training activities, and which tasks you just might be writing up desktop procedures for. So you'll be creating the order of the training activities, and then once you're complete with that section, then you can move on to assessing the activity and facilitator guide. And it's really kind of a only a couple week activity. You could, if you wanted to, you could complete it sooner than this suggested linear time frame. You can work on things a lot quicker if you have the bandwidth and the time. And then really the bulk of it is truly creating those activity guides. To me, that's the most important thing. And then once those are done, you can incorporate that back into your facilitator guide. But what we have for completion of activity guides is April 29th. And then creating your facilitator guides by June 10th. Now that is a fairly aggressive time frame. And again, it was just our initial, hey, we're going to put that out there for those time frames. But it's something to shoot for, and it's something to work towards, because as we're getting closer to the end of the year, you know, as we're approaching go live training, we want you to feel comfortable with your activities, and you've practiced your activities, and you feel like you're really ready to train your team. And so after June, you know, if July, August, September, you could be practicing and becoming ready for go live training, which, if I'm not wrong, begins in October. Is that right?
It starts, I think, the very end of October.
Very end of
Is
October.
on the current schedule. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, there, you know, this time frame here for these tasks, you know, there's wiggle room, which is built into it, but we have kind of a suggestion there for you. Yes, Anne.
Who exactly is responsible for creating the activity guide and the facilitator guide? The last time we had these types of meetings, they had been created within whether it was CNSI or DOH creating them. Who is creating those?
So right now it's each of you, the bureau trainers and the team trainers, and that's kind of what our purpose today is just to kind of highlight what that process looks like. And then our role is more supportive and helping you when you get stuck, and assisting you maybe to complete those activity guides. And so I'm not sure exactly of your situation. Are you considered a trainer, or are you in a different role?
I am a trainer for the restriction program, but prior to this, the facilitator guide and activity guide were created for us.
And are you talking about the UAT training that occurred this past summer? Yeah. So that can be used and that can be leveraged. And if that has all you need in it, then great. But if through your assessment activities, if you discover it's not specific enough for some things, then that's where you'd have the opportunity to create more specific activities for your particular area. But again, if it has all you need, then that would be wonderful.
So there is a guide that is created that will be given to us, and then it's incumbent on us to add to if necessary.
What is already created is those UAT activity guides and facilitator guides, and let me point those out to you in SharePoint. Because I think I was going to do that, but I didn't. But again, here on business trainer documents and resources, and right here where it says C3 training resources, we have each of the subsystems here. And so, for example, I mean, in the financial area, we would have facilitator guides and activity guides here, and that's what you would be assessing to see if that's enough that would comprise your training or not. in some instances, for a lot of areas, say for PA and claims, they were very generic in nature and just demonstrating system functionality, but didn't really have specific activities that demonstrated how to really submit a very specific claim or a very specific PA. But in your particular subsystem, if it doesn't have to be that specific, and if the activity guide, the facilitator guides are enough for you, then that would be great. But that's what part of your assessment would be, is looking at those activity guides and facilitator guides.
So that answers my question. There is already something out there. We're not
Yes.
supposed to build these from scratch.
You don't have to build them from scratch if you don't need to, but yes, those activity guides and facilitator guides that were used as part of the UAT training are there for you to leverage however you can leverage them and reuse them as needed. Yes.
Thank you. That takes a lot of stress out of my life.
Okay, that sounds great, Anne. But yeah, just go through that process of looking at those existing activity guides and facilitator guides. If you forget where they're located, let us know. But just go through that and assess it and see if it's lacking in anything. And then just document what it's lacking and what you need to do to train your coworkers in your area with that existing material. Okay, let's see. Where are we at? 10:16. All right, let me go back to the slides just to make sure that I am not missing anything. So yes, that's kind of the process. Lots of assessment, lots of analyzing. We know that it's a big task. We want to make sure that we're available for you and help you however way we can. We want to minimize as much stress, but realizing that you know your business processes better than we do, but yet we might be able to help you learn some of the specific system functionality to help you be able to put those two things together. I think that's most of what I wanted to cover. Did I miss anything, training team? Is there something else that I need to mention that I should have?
No, I think you did a great job with as much information as we had to share. I think you did a really good job in presenting it. And like we've mentioned several times, we know that, you know, people are starting off, they're gonna feel overwhelmed. And I just want to reassure people that as you have more experience with these individual sessions and interaction with the Prism training team and CNSI and OCM, that all of this will start to make more and more sense and will kind of congeal, I guess. It's kind of a gross word, but will kind of come together, I think, for everybody as time goes by. Steve, you had a question?
Yes, and so yes, that we're going to get started on all this and everything. As far as in one of the slides, I believe there was a link to the training system. And how often is that going to get updated, especially since there's still ongoing things with UAT and parallel that haven't been cleared up yet? How do we know if that link is going to be there? And then if we get locked out of it, who do we go to get that cleared up?
Basically, all of the answer to all of those questions is kind of around the Prism training team. So for example, kind of going backwards, your question about if you're locked out, who do you contact to get access? Patty's the person to talk to for that. She can work through those any access issues you have. As far as just being able to get into the Prism training environment in general, we'll be communicating the status of that to everybody throughout the individual mentoring sessions month to month. because there are times scheduled. We're going to have a reset of all the Prism training environment data in April. So things like that will bake into kind of the coordination and planning as we go through the individual mentoring sessions. Patty, you had your hand up.
Yes, a few folks were just asking if the meeting next Monday is a repeat. Yes.
Yes.
It is a repeat. So if you do not need to attend both of those meetings.
And then Mary.
And before Mary, let me just one comment on Steve's question. So just keep in mind too that the test environment for UAT is a separate environment than the training environment. And then there's a separate environment for parallel as well. So those are all separate environments. They'll continue on with their activities with UAT and with parallel. And then as mentioned, the training environment will be used for these activities. And then Patty is your go-to person there for access or re-access if you get locked out. So I wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mary. I'll interrupt before you do. Is that training hyperlink that was in that document that Steve that you're talking about? As far as I know, that hyperlink isn't going to change, but that's a good point. There is a potential that the training hyperlink could change, and if that's the case, we could probably just remove those hyperlinks from the activity guides if we want to, and then just have a different process for giving people the training URL rather than in the document itself.
Okay, now Mary.
Okay.
Mary, go ahead.
So kind of to go along with Steve's question, is the training environment going to be updated with expansion CRs? And how often will it be updated? Will it be a mirror of UAT or a mirror of parallel, to know that, as we come up with defects in those areas and testing, is training going to be updated as fixes are created in those? I don't want to spend time in an environment that's not close to what reality will be, and be stuck in, 4 iterations ago and not be able to see some of the things that are coming up with the expansion CR. So what version of training environment and what's the schedule? What does that look like for us to be able to use this training?
This is what we know right now, Mary, is that the training, so every time there's an updated release in UAT throughout the testing phases, they have a release weekly, and it's on a Thursday. And so the process is that the training environment gets updated the following Monday. So there's a couple 3-day lag there, but it's pretty close to be on the same version as the test, as the UAT environment. Now, currently the training environment has de-identified data in it, made up data, which is a struggle, really, when you talk about you want to work in reality. Well, having de-identified data makes it difficult because that's really not reality. That's a pretend, right? And so we're moving toward changing that. And when Patrick mentioned the refresh, or somebody mentioned the refresh in April, we're moving toward having converted data, so actual data in the training environment, similar to what we have in the test environment, in the UAT environment, which will, I think, go a long way to help understand the data and have it support the scenarios you need in your trainings. And so that is being worked on to help the situation. But that's kind of the planning and the cycling of the environments and if they're matching up.
And did you say that won't be till April? So
Right.
while we're trying to develop these, we should maybe use the UAT environment
Well,
And make sure
yeah, well,
we're not going to be able to get screenshots and stuff out of training, right?
Right. I mean, there's a couple things we can do. I mean, we can actually identify data needs. We can work with CNSI to see if we can get what we need in the training environment prior to April. And I'm having a conversation with Jen Maines on the test environment and what are our options there. But we have to be kind of careful, right? We don't want to interfere with the testing activities inadvertently. So we need to talk. I need to talk through that on the testing side with Jen to see really what we can do there. So that's kind of a little bit in flux right now.
If you can also kill two birds with one stone, if you are assigned some UAT test cases, and you're documenting what that looks like, I would say that's a perfect opportunity to work on activity guides. On activity guides, you don't have to create screenshots, but you could document the process and what data is needed. So if you are assigned a UAT test case, I think that's a perfect opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, is work on your activity guide at the same time.
So did that answer everybody's questions sufficiently for now?
Can I throw out an issue? So what's guarantee that if they create a bunch of data in the training environment that it doesn't get wiped in April? Have they looked at that scenario?
It will get wiped in April for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's all that de-identified data. So anything that you're working on up to that point in the training environment, you won't be using that data for your go live training. It will actually be real live data in the training environment. The training environment will look very much like UAT. Part of the problem with the training environment as it now stands, it's really hard to find data, say, for members. But if once it's moved for real data like UAT, we'll have a much easier time finding the data that will work in our training experience. And so, yeah, we'll have the challenges of, screenshot capture and stuff like that. But I feel like the training will go a lot smoother in go live with actual data that matches what we have in production in UAT.
Okay. Yeah, the white part that scares me.
White.
Exactly.
All right, is that all you had, Dave?
Yep.
And do we have any other questions from anybody else before we let everybody go? All right, well, I just want to thank everybody for your time. Like I said, it's a lot of information. Your frustrations are real and recognized, and we have work as the Prism training team to help clarify things and answer questions that have been brought up and identified. And feel free to send us any other questions or issues. You can put them in that tracker, and we can definitely address those as they come up. But again, just reiterating, we're here to support you. Even though it's a lot of information right off the bat, it'll start to make more and more sense as time goes by. And we'll be helping hold your hand throughout the entire process. So you're not alone in it, and don't feel embarrassed to ask any of those questions if you feel lost or stuck or overwhelmed. We're here to help. So again, thanks for taking the time to come to this, and thank you in advance for all of your efforts that will come along with this whole mentoring session process and training your groups and your areas. So unless anybody has anything else, have a good rest of your Friday.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.